I'm Dov, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. We're here with the Lizardmen today, going to be taking on the Greenskins. So let's go ahead and jump straight to the army compositions. Got a Source Old Blood on foot for my lord here, just stripped of some of his abilities. He does have Stand Your Ground and the Horn of Kygor for the double leadership buff to use, not necessarily at the same time, but to try and keep as much uptime as you can between the two. Obviously, Stand Your Ground, melee defense and leadership. As you know, Horn of Kygor, though, is charge bonus, melee attack, and leadership, so you want to hit this one first when your units are initially charging, and then hit Stand Your Ground after that wears off. In terms of the rest of the army composition, we've got a lot of infantry here. You can see very few dinos, only Gary, the old reliable Revivification Crystal, the only dinosaur we're bringing to the fight today. We've got a Skink Chief on foot with Skink Skirmishers and Chameleon Skinks for a firing squad, relatively mobile, 48 speed, not light cav by any means, but fast for infantry certainly. We've got 5 Skink Cohort with Javelins up front, 4 Saurus Warriors, and 2 Temple Guard. We've also got a Skink Priest, Lore of Heavens, probably the best lore you can take with the Skink here. Obviously, Harmonic Convergence, Wind Blast, and Curse of the Midnight Wind, all very good spells. Even Chain Lightning, Comet of Cassandora, and Uranus Thunderbolt are very good as well. It's one of the better lores of Magic in my opinion. That's pretty much it for my build. And right against us we have quite the force of Gobboz. Yes, indeed. So out in this forest we've got Wolf Riders. Over here we've got the Mangy Marauders, and then for the Infantry Corps, 2 regular Gobboz, a line of Night Goblins, looks like both the Regiment of Renown, AP Cloonies, and Warlords Boys, plus 2 more units of Night Goblins, juiced up with some Chevrons, so they actually have pretty decent combat stats. Also got 3 units of Nasty Skulkers, Rusty Airs, and another unit of Goblin Archers, a single unit of Trolls, got Skarsnik, a Night Goblin Shaman, and a Goblin Big Boss, as well as 2 Doom Diver Catapults. Not a super common pick against the Lizardmen, but an interesting one nonetheless. Looks like 1 more Goblin Archer, and that's it. So let's go ahead and kick the battle into full gear, and we'll watch as things unfold. So yeah, obviously we're going to be advancing slowly, as the Lizardmen, Saurus at least, are not the fastest. 31 speed is pretty slow, so we're going to be taking that fire as we advance, but I'm perfectly happy with letting the Doom Divers fire away my Skink Cohort, although they did just take out 10, it looks like, with a single shot there. It's pretty good. Not too bad at all for that Doom Diver. But the Doom Divers, I mean, if you're expecting a very infantry-heavy build like this, it can be good, but Doom Divers are really, I think, more for sniping out high-value ranged units. That's where I've got the most success from them. I really have a hard time making them cost-effective otherwise, but if you're up against the Wood Elves, for example, they're really nice at shooting at things like Way Watchers, Glade Guard. In general, lower armor units are better because the Doom Divers don't do a whole lot of AP, but we're trying to screen out these Mangy Marauders here with my Skinks. The only real target for them is either these Temple Guard or the Revivification Crystal, both of which are going to be important, but you can see we're pushing forward here with the Skinks, going to pull up in Javelin throwing range, start to potentially unload. I also can't see a lot of the Night Goblin units, of course, because they have stock. They're not going to become visible until about right now. You can see that stock symbol on their little tooltip there dropping off. I decided to unload some Javelins here. I did take all my Javelins off of fire at will just so I could control manually, but we're going to start firing, obviously, the Regiment of Renown, any that we can take down for the AP Cloonies. These guys are unbreakable, so any that we can take down at range will be good, although they do have a good missile block chance, so firing into the front like this isn't necessarily the best use of these Javelins, particularly because Skink Cohort do have a relatively limited number of them, but here comes the Fanatics going off in the center, doing a little bit of friendly fire, but they are going to make pretty solid contact with the Lizardmen lines. At least 2 of them did. The other one looks like it actually did more friendly fire than good, but pretty decent, although the Night Goblins did take some damage there from the Javelins, and all said and done as well. Over here on this side, we've got the Wolf Riders interrupting. Skink Cohort Javelin, they have okay-ish combat stats, but getting charged like that by Wolf Riders will be pretty rough. Very nice use of a low-cost unit there. We threw in the Temple Guard to deal with these Trolls. They're taking a lot of damage, though, getting shot at, and Trolls themselves obviously do armor piercing, so despite the Temple Guard's great combat stats and anti-large bonus, They're also being debuffed by Itchy Nuisance and more, so it's really not a great engagement for them. Meanwhile, though, we're pushing through the center here and starting to unleash some Wind Blasts across the Gobbo lines. Of course, Wind Blast is going to be very effective here against these light armor Gobbos. Temple Guard here fighting the 8-peak loonies with the support of old Walmart Crockguard himself, the generic Saurus Oldblood, who is a pretty decent infantry character. He's got 52 melee defense, does armor piercing, not the best weapon strength, but 95 armor and a shield, so he's, you know, relatively tanky. There's an item you can bring with him as well that gives him a whole bunch of damage resistance. It's like a one-time use, similar to the Karstein Ring, but not quite as much. I think it's only like a 66% rather than the Karstein Ring's 90. But similar idea, just gives him a one-time use damage resistance buff. I didn't bring it in this battle, but another Wind Blast going down, just going to devastate these two units of nasty skulkers and rout them off, who otherwise had been performing pretty decently, especially considering my opponent juiced him up with some chevrons. And this is one thing you can do if you take a full Gobbo force, is because you'll oftentimes have some funds left over. You can chevron up some of your Gobbo units and they'll perform much more effectively. You can see Warlord's Boys, obviously their Regiment of Renown, sundering the armor and actually beating a unit of Saurus in what was more or less isolated engagement. These two were fighting here in the center, mostly one-on-one for quite some time, so yeah, that very impressive display from the Warlords Boys. You can see the balance power starting to turn against me a little bit here. The Skink Chief is going to get caught out by this big boss here, who's going to be a decent assassin, but I'm going to toss Harmonic Convergence on the Skink Chief so that he can hang around in this melee a little bit longer, and then get the Saurus Oldblood in here to support as well. So suddenly the big boss is going to find himself in a situation that's not super favorable, at least as long as that Harmonic Convergence is up on the Skink Chief. Or sorry, the Skink Priest. Speaking of the Skink Chief, his firing squad is just kind of chilling here in the back. We pulled him to a more defensive position to try and help deal with these trolls in particular, because they were doing more damage than I was comfortable with to my Temple Guard, so the fire is going to see them off there. And then because these guys are relatively healthy, we can kind of just start pushing up here and shooting at whoever we need to. Gary has been tossing out some heals and currently is fighting up against good old Skarsnik here, who you don't see too often, but Skarsnik does have some good abilities. I'll talk more about him in the endgame screen and what I think they could do to make Skarsnik a little bit better. He's decent. He's not amazing, but he does armor piercing anti-large, so he will be able to do some damage to Gary. But now that he's all isolated and getting shot in the back, he's not going to have the best time. Meanwhile, Walmart Crockgar and his Skink Priest buddy pushing through. The big boss is back to try and dish some damage while the Cold-Blooded is up. But, I mean, this Saurus Oldblood's here to protect, so this that little big boss isn't going to want to stay in here for too long. Meanwhile, Temple Guard pushing through. You can see a lot of the Gobbos being routed off at this point. What initially was looking pretty bad is starting to come back in our favor. We're able to push a lot of units off the field. You can see a lot of Gobbos shattering at this point, and more importantly, Skarsnik gets terrified by Gary. Good old Gary, oh so scary. You terrified the poor little goblin, and now he's running away, and actually just rallied. But, I mean, Skarsnik only has 50 armor and no missile block chance. Does have a bit of missile resistance, 15%, but it's not going to help him in this situation. He's going to get routed off and shot to pieces by the Skinks there. The Gobbo Big Boss still trying to finish off the Skink Priest Lord of Heavens, but at this point, it's probably a little bit too little too late. You can see the Doom Divers were able to use up almost all their ammunition. This one almost 200 kills and just picked up an XP Chevron there. So pretty impressive. You know, I was kind of ragging on these guys earlier, but they actually did pretty decently considering I brought a very heavy infantry build. If I had brought more of a Dino Mash, they may not have had as much to do, but I don't know, maybe the full Gobbo thing could work okay against the Dino Mash because you have a lot of AP options. The issue you're going to run into is, of course, terror. Goblins don't have great leadership, and the Lizardmen can bring a lot of terror options with their dinos, but despite us only having Gary and him taking quite a bit of damage, we still, you know, able to drop a few key terror bombs and keep him alive long enough to get some heals and such out of him. So yeah, at this point it is going to be victory for the Lizardmen. The Skink Skirmishers and Chameleon Skinks, led by their chief here, going to be finishing off the Greenskins. So the Gobbos more specifically. I don't think there were any orcs in this list at all, so a very fun battle. Thematic army certainly from my opponent. I don't know that it's the most competitive, but it was actually pretty decent. I was a little bit worried there in the mid game that I might lose it, but you know, obviously the leadership core of the Lizardmen was very, very healthy, and once the Skink Priest started unleashing those wind blasts, he was able to rack up a lot of kills, 102. Obviously, you would expect a lot of kills against the Gobboz, but just goes to show how good Wind Blast is in that situation. Saurus all did pretty decently, although considering they're fighting goblins, you might hope they do better. Temple Guard did have 2 chevrons before the battle. The one managed to pick up another one, racking up 111 kills and fighting off those trolls with the help of the firing squad here, the Skink Skirmishers, Chameleon Skinks, and the Priest. The Chief. I always get those two confused. But anyway, Gary himself dropping some key terror bombs. Only 13 kills, but of course the healing and the terror is really what he's here for. And yeah, the cohort trading okay with goblins in certain situations. Some of the other ones kind of got ran over by Cav. But overall, pretty fun for my opponent. You can see the one Doom Diver definitely paid off. The other one didn't quite so much. Gobbo Archers also didn't do a whole lot. They didn't have too many great targets to shoot at. But yeah, I mean, you can see some of these nasty Skulkers actually did pretty good. 143 is not bad at all. Granted, a lot of that is probably against Skinks, but yeah. Skarsnik, let's go ahead and take a look at him. Poor little Skarsnik. I mean, he's cool, but by nature, infantry-only lords already are kind of at a disadvantage because of their lack of mobility. And Skarsnik has a few other issues that kind of compound that in particular. So if we look at Skarsnik here, let's see. In his Crooked Moon guys here. Wog, of course, as all greenskin characters have. Spite of the Bad Moon is the one that the Goblin Warboss and Skarsnik have. Gives expert charge defense and missile parry, which is a pretty decent effect. Let's go ahead and just quickly test this out. I want to see if this actually works on Skarsnik himself, but we'll go over his other abilities briefly. Tricksy Traps is a nice one. Gives an area of effect, stock, and unspottable. So if you're against an artillery-heavy army, you know, you could potentially do something silly like put an Arachnarok Spider right on top of Skarsnik, pop this, it lasts 29 seconds, not a crazy amount of time, but it will hide you from enemy artillery at least for a little bit. And of course, any units in that area of effect that are don't have stock already, so that allows you to kind of build a core around Skarsnik of units that don't typically have stock, and then the rest of your army can be Night Goblins so that you can get a full hide right off the bat. But yeah, it's a little bit of a interesting ability. I don't know how much utility it actually has at the end of the day. And the Prada, you know, I've never it's been a while since I've used this thing. I suppose we can take it here and test it out, but I haven't really had too much good success with it personally. But in terms of Skarsnik's stat line, if we go ahead and analyze that here, and a shameless plug once again for my How to Read Stat Card video, if you want to learn more, then go ahead and check that out. But yeah, Skarsnik, only 50 armor, a little bit of missile resistance. He does have charge defense against large, which is nice. Has a 52 charge bonus himself. His weapon strength is not great. It's pretty low in total, only 390. Does have a bonus versus large of 30, but his combat stats are, yeah, they're okay for a melee hero. They're not great by any means. He does have poison, but the issue is Skarsnik has relatively poor leadership. I mean, he does have better leadership than, say, the Orc Warboss or the Goblin Great Shaman, but still, 75 is not great, especially when he's vulnerable to terror. And because he can't get knocked over like other infantry lords, because it's him and Goblet in the same unit model, when he gets charged, even though he has charge defense, he still oftentimes takes the full amount of the impact damage rather than getting knocked over. So it's a little bit tough in that way. Him not being immune to psychology and being relatively easy to terror out is also a pretty big problem, because you would think armor piercing anti-large, maybe he'd be immune to psychology. He has the Squig with him, which, I mean, obviously, I think Squigs are immune to psych. I know at least Squig Hoppers are immune to psychology. Are the Squig herds themselves? Yes, they are. So maybe you could give him an argument for immune to psychology because Gobbler's with him, and Gobbler's a Squig, and Squigs are immune to psychology. But I do think that would go a long way to helping Skarsnik. But otherwise, you know, it's just low armor. He's relatively slow. He's an infantry-only character. He has okay-ish stats. They're not great, but he's not even that cheap. I mean, 1800 is all right, but when you consider the Goblin Warboss that has the Tormentor Sword, can take a Squig mount, also has Spite of the Bad Moon, and, you know, arguably has better utility in a lot of different ways. I mean, you can take him for 1303, which is the guys I would probably take him in. You know, you could argue for the Potion of Foolhardiness, but yeah, and it's, I mean, his stat line isn't that much worse. He has bonus versus infantry rather than bonus versus large on the Squig. It does more weapon strength total, is faster, And yeah, just overall, I think Skarsnik needs a buff. If he's gonna, I mean, he is an infantry-only character, so he needs to have better combat stats, and he probably needs to have immune to psychology. I would also give him an argument for having more weapon strength. If we go ahead and compare to, I'm trying to think of who would maybe a good comparison. Queek is more of an anti-infantry character rather than anti-large type character, but I mean, you look at the difference. Queek is got less melee defense, but his melee attack is better. His total weapon strength, oh, that's the Night Goblin war boss, whoops. His total weapon strength is better, charge bonus slightly less, and he has different utility abilities. I won't say that they're necessarily better, but he has different ones. Obviously, he has more armor, but also not immune to psychology. Interesting. So the other thing too is Queek is faster. Obviously, he's a Skaven, and you know, Skarsnik is only a Gobboz. So I think if you were to give him a little bit better combat stats, maybe make him like Tretch, where he has really high melee defense, so he's hard to hit. That would probably be good, and give him immune to psychology, just because, again, he's with the Squig. Squigs are immune to psychology. You can kind of see the train of thought there, and he just gets terrified way too easy, I think. So let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below, though. What do you think about Skarsnik? How would you go about improving him? If you do like this kind of content, go ahead and like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, so every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thank you once again for watching, and we'll see you next time.